My name is Susie, and at 22 years old, I spent 4 months organizing my sister's Sweet 16, but they all went on a trip to Canada instead. No one told me in advance. We just wanted to keep you busy. Mom laughed. We know you enjoy organizing stuff, Dad added. So I gave her this present. The next morning, my parents were calling the police on me. If you have ever felt betrayed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, let me know where you are watching from. They say planning a party is supposed to be fun, a creative outlet, a chance to pour your heart into something that will be remembered forever. That's what I told myself when I agreed to organize Chloe's Sweet 16. I wasn't aiming for a fairy tale. I just wanted something good, something she'd look back on and smile about someday. Maybe she'd even brag to her college friends about it. My big sister threw me the sweetest party ever. I pictured her face when she walked in. The fairy lights glowing, the smell of food filling the air, music pumping from the DJs set up in the corner. I pictured her eyes lighting up, the way they used to when she was small, and still thought I was someone worth looking up to. I poured everything I had into making that picture real. It started weeks ago, standing in the freezing aisle of the dollar store, arguing with myself over paper lanterns and balloons. Did purple feel too childish? Was gold too tacky? I ended up getting both. It didn't matter if it clashed a little. I figured the more color, the better. It was a celebration after all. The guest list was long. Chloe had a lot of friends, and she wanted it big. That meant a lot of food, which meant days of prepping and cooking. In my tiny kitchen, working overtime, to make sure everything would be perfect. I made sliders mini quiches, pasta salad. I spent 3 separate nights baking trays of cookies, freezing them so they'd stay fresh. I even tried my hand at a homemade birthday cake, because buying one would have blown my budget. It wasn't about saving money, though. It was about love, about showing her that someone cared, enough to put in the work. The morning of the party, I woke up early, pulled the cake out of the freezer to thaw, double-checked the decorations, swept the floor even though it was already clean. I set up the folding tables, draped in the best tablecloths I could find. At the second-hand store, arranged the food carefully, like one of those Pinterest moms I used to secretly admire. I even packed the present, a delicate gold locket I found at an estate sale 2 towns over. It wasn't expensive, but it felt special personal. Inside the locket, I tucked a tiny picture of the two of us, me holding her on the day she was born. My face lit up with a joy I barely recognized now. I imagined giving it to her opening it, seeing the picture, throwing her arms around me. Maybe crying, maybe just smiling so wide that it hurt, maybe for once, feeling what I had been trying to show her for 16 years by 5:30. Everything was ready, the lights were on. The music queued up, the food laid out like a feast. I slipped into my best dress. Nothing fancy, navy blue, a little worn. But Greg always said it brought out my eyes. I shoved the thought of him aside. Tonight wasn't about regrets. Tonight was about Chloe. I stood in front of the mirror, practiced a smile, not too forced, not too desperate, just happy poof. 6:00 came. I checked my phone. No messages yet, no on our way or running late. I smoothed down the tablecloth again, adjusted the centerpiece for the 3rd time. Alice, the young DJ. I hired off Craigslist, gave me an awkward thumbs up from the corner. You ready to party, he called. I laughed a little too loudly. Yeah, any minute now. 6:30. Still no one. I refreshed my text, opened Instagram. Nothing. Maybe traffic. Maybe a last-minute group photo session somewhere, like teens love to do. I chewed my thumbnail, immediately regretting it. I'd spent an hour doing my nails the night before, a sad attempt to feel put together. 7:00. Alice shifted uncomfortably behind his turntables. You want me to start playing some warm-up stuff? He asked. Sure, I said, voice light, like this was all part of the plan. The first notes of pop music filled the empty room, bouncing awkwardly off the walls. I stood by the door, scanning the street every few seconds. Still nothing, just the faint flicker of porch lights and the occasional whine of a passing car. At 7:30, I finally pulled out my phone and called Chloe. Voicemail. I called Mom next. He picked up on the second ring, cheerful and loud and somehow on speakerphone. I heard Chloe's voice giggling in the background. tires humming against the road. "Oh, honey," Mom said brightly, "meant to call you. Last minute change of plans." I gripped the phone tighter. "We're heading to Canada," she said. "Isn't that exciting?" My mind stalled out like an old car trying to start. I thought the party I managed. "Yeah, well, Chloe really wanted something special," Mom said. "And you were having so much fun planning. We didn't want to ruin it for you." Someone laughed in the background. Probably Chloe. Dad's voice chimed in, slightly muffled. "We figured it was good for you. You love organizing stuff." I stared around the room, the empty tables, the untouched cake, the fairy lights slowly flickering, as if even they were losing hope. It wasn't a party, it was a wake. I just hadn't realized who the guest of honor was. I hung up. I don't remember saying goodbye. I just stood there clutching my phone, like it might anchor me to something real. Alice packed up without a word. I didn't blame him. At 8, I blew out the candles one by one, like little funeral rites. At 9, I sat on the floor with my knees hugged to my chest, staring at the locket sitting in its pretty wrapped box. 10. I knew that this wasn't something I could just sweep up and throw away with the streamers. Somewhere deep inside me, something shifted. Tonight, something ended, and soon something else would begin, something they would never be able to take back. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was crying, not because I was angry, not even because I was planning anything. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the fairy lights, buzzing faintly against the walls, wondering how it took me 22 years to figure it out. This was never about one party. It never was when I was 6 and Chloe was born. I thought she was a gift. I used to sneak into her room in the mornings, before school, just to see her tiny fists waving in the air, like she was conducting a silent symphony. She'd laugh when she saw me, this bright, gurgling laugh. That made Mom's tired face soften into something, like happiness for a long time. I thought that was my job. Make Chloe smile, keep Mom and Dad happy, stay out of the way, and, if it meant giving up the last chocolate chip cookie, or missing Saturday cartoons to watch her, that was fine. It was love. It was family when I turned 10. Dad sat me down and gave me a serious talk about priorities. "You're the oldest now, Susie," he said like I hadn't noticed. "The screaming baby already had more outfits than I had. Socks, Chloe's younger. She needs more attention. You're a big girl. You can handle things on your own." I nodded because that's what big girls did when I was 12, and wanted to join the school's after-school art club. Mom shook her head and said it clashed with the times. Chloe needed picking up from dance lessons. "Family first," she said, handing me a set of car keys, before I was old enough to drive. By high school, it was just a fact of life. Chloe needed the new soccer cleats. We tightened the grocery budget. Chloe needed braces. I got a part-time job at the grocery store to chip in. I didn't resent her, not then. I thought it was normal, expected. I told myself that once I got older, once I got through college, once I made enough money, then it would be my turn. Then I could breathe. College was supposed to be the start. I didn't dare apply anywhere, more than an hour from home. Mom worried about emergencies, and Dad reminded me about helping with Chloe's schedule. Community college made sense. They said affordable, local practical, and practical responsible. Susie didn't argue. I squeezed in classes between shifts at the supermarket and late-night babysitting gigs for Chloe's friends. I learned to stretch a $5 meal across. 3 days I learned to pretend I didn't hear. When other students talked about study abroad trips or road trips across the country, it was fine. It was all temporary. I had a plan: work hard, graduate. Get a steady job, help Chloe through college. Then I could think about myself. Maybe sometimes, though, when it was late and I was too tired to sleep, I'd pick up my guitar. I wasn't great. Good enough for open mics. Maybe good enough to dream a little. Music was the only thing that felt purely mine. Not something practical, not something responsible, just joy. There was a boy, too. Back then, Michael Keller. Skinny jeans, soft brown eyes, voice like cracked honey. He played the drums. We messed around in a band for a while. Nothing serious, just covers and the occasional hopeful original. He talked about leaving traveling, seeing the world, with nothing but a backpack and a guitar. He asked me once if I wanted to come with him. I laughed. Of course not. I had responsibilities, maybe someday. I said someday is a long time to wait. He told me, but he smiled like he understood, and he left. And I stayed because that's what good daughters do. They stay. They give, and when there's nothing left to give, they smile and find more after college. I got a job at a local insurance office. Steady paycheck, benefits respectable. Every paycheck I squirreled away, whatever I could for Chloe's college fund. It wasn't much, not yet, but I had a plan she wanted to go out of state, someplace fancy and ivy covered. I wanted to make sure she could, even if it meant I wouldn't leave this town. For another 10 years, maybe longer. And then came Greg Solid, sweet Greg, who loved spreadsheets and home repair videos and dreaming about suburban life. He loved me too, or at least the version of me he thought I could be, if I stopped looking out the window like the world was calling my name. He wanted a house, kids, stability, and for a while. I thought I could want those things too, until he packed up his things and said very gently, "You don't belong here, Susie. You're just too scared to leave." He wasn't wrong. So when Mom suggested I organize Chloe's Sweet 16, it felt like a second chance, a way to prove I wasn't selfish, that I could be what they needed, that maybe I wasn't the failure Greg saw. When he looked at me, I said yes before she even finished asking. I told myself that seeing Chloe's face light up would be enough, that it would fill the hollow space Greg left behind, that if I just worked hard enough, loved hard enough, sacrificed hard enough, someone would finally see me. But standing in that empty apartment, with cold candles and melting frosting, and the gold locket still sitting unopened, I realized something for the first time. They weren't going to see me. Not ever, because I wasn't a person to them. I was a function, a service, a warm body to cook clean, plan pay, smile, and keep everything moving. And the second I stopped being useful, I stopped existing. I stayed awake all night, feeling the truth settle into my bones, feeling the anger simmer low and steady under my skin. I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet, but I knew this much: things were about to change. The morning after the party, that wasn't. The apartment still smelled like frosting and disappointment. I stood in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, staring at the leftover decorations. The fairy lights blinked lazily, one already burnt out. The cake sagged under its own weight, the frosting sliding off in slow defeat. It should have hurt more. Maybe a few years ago it would have. Now it just felt hollow, like I'd finally run out of reasons to pretend. I started moving fast after that, not out of panic, out of clarity. First, I canceled my rental agreement. Luckily, my landlord was a bidder, old man who didn't care about notice periods, as long as he got a little extra cash to grease the wheels. I slid the cash across his grimy desk without blinking. Next, I walked into the office where I'd spent the last year, filing other people's dreams into color-coded folders, and submitted my resignation. 2 weeks' notice, not this time. My manager's eyes widened like a cartoon character. When he read the letter, he sputtered something about future opportunities and burning bridges, but I was already gone before he could finish. I wasn't burning bridges. I was lighting my own damn road. By noon, I was home. A one-way ticket to France sitting in my inbox. Gleaming like a dare, I stared at it for a long time. The little blinking cursor, next to the confirmation number, felt like a heartbeat in 2 weeks. I'd be gone not just from this apartment, not just from this town, from all of it. The last thing to do was leave Chloe's birthday present. It sat there on the table, still neatly wrapped, still waiting. Like it thought. Maybe there was a world where this ended differently. I picked it up, weighed it in my hand. It felt heavier than it should have. Maybe because it wasn't just a necklace anymore. It was everything I had left to say. I drove out to my parents' house. In the old Corolla Greg had left me after the breakup. It still smelled faintly like stale coffee and regret. The streets were quiet gray, a few soggy leaves clinging stubbornly to the sidewalks. I figured that the last time I drove, this road would feel like a funeral march. I let myself into the house, with the spare key tucked behind the porch light, the same one they'd never bothered to change, because they didn't think I'd ever leave. Inside, everything was just as I remembered. Same sagging couch, same faded photos on the walls, Chloe at every stage of life. Me only in the background like a misplaced extra. I walked up the creaky stairs to Chloe's room. It was bigger than my entire apartment. String lights, Polaroids pinned artfully to the walls, designer clothes draped casually over chairs. I set the present down on her desk. Taped to the top was a letter, neatly folded and handwritten, in the best penmanship I could manage. After 4 hours of sleep. I didn't say much, just the important parts. This was her last gift from me. I was leaving. I wasn't paying for her college. I wished her well goodbye. No dramatics, no explanations. Just the truth. I stood there for a moment after, fingers trailing the edge of her desk. Not sad, not angry, just finished. Then I left, locked the door behind me, dropped the key through the mail slot, walked away without looking back. I barely made it home before the calls started. First Mom, then Dad, then Chloe. The text came next, piling up so fast. My phone bust itself off the kitchen counter. Call me now. What is wrong with you? Fix this. You're overreacting. I didn't answer. I didn't even read most of them. I just sat at the table sipping coffee gone cold, staring at the ticket on my screen, like it was a map to another life. Around 5 p.m., someone pounded on my door. I didn't have to look through the peephole. To know who it was, I opened it. Mom stood there wild-eyed, clutching her phone like it could shield her. Dad loomed behind her, arms crossed so tight it looked painful. Chloe was half hiding behind them. Mascara smudged, looking more pissed than sad. You can't be serious, Mom said, voice shrill. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. I'm serious. You quit your job, Dad demanded. I nodded. Yep, got the resignation receipt right here, if you want a souvenir and you bought a plane ticket. Mom's voice cracked. I smiled, a small, sharp thing. One way, France. For a moment there was silence, just the three of them, staring at me like I'd sprouted horns. Then Chloe stepped forward. You're ruining everything, she snapped. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilt or duty, or love twisted up in obligation. It has felt free. You said you had a change of heart. I said quietly. They blinked. Confused about the party, I added. About me. I stepped back, letting the door swing slightly toward closing. Well, I said. So did I. They argued. Of course they did. They shouted. Dad even pulled out the old guilt trip. Greatest hits album, Family First. You owe us. We gave you everything. Mom cried. Chloe threw something about being abandoned. I let them. I didn't raise my voice, didn't defend myself. I just stood there quiet and steady as they unraveled. Finally, they realized they weren't getting anywhere. Dad muttered something under his breath about fixing this another way, and they left, slamming the door so hard the fairy lights trembled. I locked the door behind them, turned off my phone, sat down at the kitchen table, breathing in the silence, like it was the first clean air I'd had in years, for the first time. I thought maybe I really did go crazy, but if this was madness, it felt a hell of a lot like freedom. I slept that night not deeply, not peacefully, but better than I had in months. But things were far from over. I really didn't expect what was coming next. The police didn't bang on my door. Like they do in movies, it was a polite knock, almost apologetic still. My stomach dropped so hard. I thought I might puke. Right there on the kitchen tiles. Miss Lark, the taller officer, said when I cracked the door open, "We'd like to ask you a few questions about a reported theft." I stared at them. I heard the words, I just couldn't make sense of them. A theft me. Some stupid, absurd part of me thought maybe it's a mistake. Maybe someone broke into the wrong house. Maybe your parents filed the report. The officer said, voice gentle, like he was easing me into it. And just like that, the world tilted. They accused me of two things: stealing the college fund and stealing cash directly from their house. The second accusation was laughable. They hadn't even had cash lying around, unless they were planning this, and planted some conveniently missing emergency savings story after the fact. But it didn't feel funny. It felt sickening. Because they hadn't just tried to guilt trip me. They hadn't just tried to shame me. They had tried to ruin me. I let the officers inside, pulled out my folders, my bank records, my pay stubs. I showed them in, calm. Methodical order, how every cent had come from my own salary, how the account had always been in my name. I stayed calm. I didn't cry. I didn't shout if I had to survive this. I needed to be the adult they never let me be. It wasn't a quick process. The officers made calls, filled out forms. I sat at the kitchen table, the walls closing in tighter every minute, wondering if I'd be handcuffed, and dragged through town before my plane even boarded. But in the end, logic won. The money was mine. There was no evidence I'd stolen anything. The case was dropped, before it even had the chance to stain my record. The officers apologized politely but stiffly. Take them. I closed the door behind them, and then I sat down at the table and stared at the cracks in the wood. Until my vision blurred an hour later, I was knocking on my parents' front door, not with hope, not with fear. With something sharper, Dad answered, looking like he hadn't slept good. Can we talk? I asked. Voice like ice. He hesitated, then stepped back. Mom was sitting in the living room, clutching a coffee mug so tightly, I thought it might shatter. Chloe perched on the stairs, arms crossed, looking equal parts furious and scared. You tried to get me arrested. I said no pleasantries, no soft landings. Mom flinched. Dad's jaw tightened. We didn't want it to go that far, he said finally. I laughed a dry, humorless sound. No. What was the plan then? Get me banned from leaving the country. Make me so scared I'd stay. Neither of them answered. I pressed forward. You made up theft charges against your own daughter. You weren't thinking straight, Susie. Mom said, her voice wobbled. You were throwing everything away. You quit your job. You gave up your apartment. You were going to run off to another continent with no plan, no future. We had to stop you for my own good, I said flatly. Dad nodded. We thought if there was an investigation, you wouldn't be able to travel. You'd have to stay. You'd calm down. You'd thank us later. I stared at them, at the people who raised me, at the people who decided controlling me was love, at the people who thought their fear was worth more than my freedom. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just turned around, walked out the door, and closed it behind me. In the car, my hands shook so badly, I had to sit for a while before driving. Not from sadness, from rage. From the kind of betrayal you don't come back from. By the next morning, I had a new plan. They wanted to lie about me, fine, but they didn't get to keep lying in the dark. I started simple an email to the extended family, the aunts, uncles, cousins, just the facts. How I spent months planning Chloe's sweet 16. How they ditched me for a Canada trip, without telling me how they laughed about it. How they tried to trap me here, by filing a false police report. No emotion, no accusations, just receipts. Then I sent a few polite messages to Chloe's friends, the ones who were supposed to come to the party, the ones I'd made mini gift bags for, now gathering dust under my bed. I didn't scream, I didn't slander. I just let them know the truth, about why there was no party, about who had really been responsible. The ripple effect was immediate. Text emails, phone calls I didn't answer. Family gatherings would be awkward for a while. Chloe's birthday posts were quietly deleted. Mom's Facebook page, once a shrine to family values, went suspiciously quiet. Good actions have consequences, and sometimes so does silence. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I had a plane to catch. Micah texted me that morning. Train tickets booked to Marseille hostel ready. You're going to love the music scene here. Bring your guitar. It wasn't a grand declaration of love, wasn't some fairy tale. It was an open door, a reminder that I was choosing something better. Something mine, at the airport waiting for boarding. I thought about Chloe, about how once I would have moved mountains to make her happy. Now I was just moving myself out of their orbit. It felt like loss. It also felt like victory. Maybe both things could be true at the same time. When my flight number was called, I stood up, grabbed my backpack, slung my guitar over my shoulder, took one last breath of stale terminal air, and walked forward toward France. Toward music, toward maybe, just maybe, a life where I wasn't just the responsible one, where I was free. I don't know if I made all the right choices. Maybe there was a better way to handle it. Maybe there wasn't, but I do know this. For the first time in my life, I chose myself, and honestly, I don't regret it. What do you think? Was I wrong to walk away the way I did? Should I have forgiven them? Or was it finally time to stop being the one who always stayed? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more stories like this one, full of mistakes, heartbreak, and maybe a little hope, make sure to subscribe.